Logan Hayes stepped out of his sleek black limousine, his polished shoes hitting the marble steps of the estate he had abandoned 2 years ago. The towering mansion loomed above him, but it no longer felt like home. Not since Victoria had left him. Not since the lies. The betrayal. The staff scurried inside, preparing for his arrival, but Logan ignored them. His gaze swept the pristine garden, the carefully trimmed hedges and blooming roses, but none of it soothed the storm raging within him. "Mr. Hayes." He turned to see Daniel Cross, his trusted lawyer, approaching with a folder tucked under his arm. "Welcome back," Daniel said. "Is everything in order?" Logan asked, his tone clipped. "Yes, sir. Your return has made quite an impression." Daniel hesitated. "And Victoria, she's remarried." Logan's jaw tightened. He already knew. He had followed her life from afar, watching as she moved on, pretending he never existed. Marrying his biggest rival, Richard Monroe, had been her final betrayal. "I don't care," Logan said, though the bitterness in his voice betrayed him. "Let's move forward with the plan." Daniel handed him the folder, but before Logan could open it, a soft thud caught his attention. He turned to see Emma Clark, the housekeeper, drop a tray of glasses, the shards scattering across the floor. "I'm so sorry." Emma scrambled to clean up, her hands trembling. Logan watched her. She was plain, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, her clothes simple and wrinkled. There was nothing remarkable about her. Nothing that should have held his attention. And yet, there was something in her eyes, fear, maybe? Pain? He couldn't quite place it. "Leave it," he said sharply, and she froze. "I'll clean it up," Emma whispered, kneeling to gather the glass. Logan turned to Daniel. "Who is she?" "Emma Clark. Hired a year ago. Quiet, keeps to herself." Logan narrowed his eyes. Victoria and Richard were hosting a charity gala soon, a spectacle where they would flaunt their perfect marriage and their wealth. Logan needed a way to turn the spotlight back on him, to remind everyone who he was. And suddenly, he had an idea. "Emma." His voice made her look up, startled. "Yes, sir." "Do you want to get out of here? Start a new life?" Her lips parted, her eyes wide with disbelief. I don't understand." "Marry me." The words hung in the air, shocking even him. But he didn't back down. "Excuse me?" Emma's voice cracked. Logan stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "You heard me. I need a wife, and you need a chance to change your life. I'll make it worth your while." Emma stood, clutching the shards of glass in her hands. Her breathing was uneven, and for a moment, Logan thought she might refuse. But then she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. Logan felt a strange pang in his chest. He expected more resistance, maybe even questions, but instead, she surrendered. Almost too easily. As Emma left to clean up, Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure about this?" Logan didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." But as he watched Emma's retreating figure, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just stepped into something far more complicated than he'd anticipated. The days following Logan's impulsive proposal were a blur of activity. The mansion, usually quiet and somber, buzzed with preparations for the upcoming wedding. Staff rushed to and fro, and vendors flooded the estate with samples of flowers, menus, and fabric swatches. Through it all, Emma remained in the background, an enigma that only deepened Logan's curiosity. He found her one morning in the kitchen, meticulously arranging breakfast on a silver tray. Her hands moved with a precision that suggested years of experience, yet she flinched when anyone spoke to her too loudly. "Emma," Logan said, stepping into the room. She froze, her back to him, but quickly regained her composure. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes." "Logan," he corrected. "We're going to be married. You can call me Logan." Her lips twitched, almost forming a smile, but it disappeared as quickly as it had come. "Is there something you need?" He studied her for a moment, noting how her fingers tightened around the edge of the tray. Do you regret saying yes? Emma finally turned to face him, her expression guarded. No. But I wonder why you asked me. Logan leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. You seemed convenient. The words hung heavy in the air, but Emma didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head, as if weighing his response. Convenient, she repeated softly, her tone unreadable. That's fair, I suppose. She picked up the tray and left without another word, leaving Logan to grapple with the unsettling feeling that he wasn't the only one playing a game. Later that day, Logan met with Daniel Cross, his lawyer, in the study. She's strange, Logan said, swirling a glass of scotch in his hand. Too calm. Too accepting. Daniel raised an eyebrow. What did you expect? She's a housekeeper. You just offered her a life most people only dream about. It's not that simple. Logan leaned forward, his voice lowering. There's something she's hiding. Daniel sighed, pulling out a stack of papers. I ran a background check, as you asked. Emma Clark is as ordinary as they come. No criminal record, no debts, no significant relationships. She's clean. Too clean, Logan muttered. Nobody is that unremarkable. Daniel hesitated before sliding a folder across the desk. There was one oddity. A name popped up during the check, Christopher Bennett. He's connected to a series of shady dealings, and Emma worked at a hotel he frequented about 5 years ago. Logan's fingers tightened around the glass. What kind of dealings? Nothing concrete. But enough to raise questions. Logan closed the folder, his jaw tightening. Keep digging. I want to know everything about her. That evening, Logan found Emma in the library, sitting in the far corner with a book open on her lap. She didn't look up as he approached, but her grip on the book tightened. You're full of surprises, he said, taking the seat across from her. I didn't think reading was surprising, Emma replied, her voice even. Not the reading. The way you're so composed. Emma finally met his gaze, her brown eyes steady. You think I should be scared? Nervous? Logan leaned back, studying her. Most people would be. A small smile played on her lips, but it didn't reach her eyes. I've been through worse. Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Logan wanted to press her, to peel back the layers of whatever she was hiding, but something held him back. Instead, he nodded toward the book in her lap. What are you reading? She hesitated before holding up the cover. It was an old, weathered copy of The Great Gatsby. Logan chuckled. A story about wealth and deception. Fitting. Emma's smile widened, but again, it didn't reach her eyes. Maybe we all have a little Gatsby in us. As Logan left the library, he couldn't shake the feeling that Emma's story was far more complicated than he had anticipated. And whatever it was only a matter of time before it unraveled. The day of the wedding arrived with a sense of unease that Logan couldn't quite shake. The estate was alive with activity, florists arranging bouquets, caterers setting tables, and photographers testing angles. Yet, amid the chaos, Emma moved like a ghost. She stood by the window in the bridal suite, staring out at the sprawling gardens below. Her reflection in the glass revealed a woman transformed, her simple features softened by makeup, her plain brown hair styled into elegant waves. The dress, a flowing ivory gown, hugged her frame in ways that made Logan momentarily forget why he'd chosen her. But as he entered the room, Emma turned to face him, and the vulnerability in her eyes shattered the illusion. Are you sure about this? She asked quietly, her fingers gripping the edge of the vanity table. Logan hesitated. It was the first time she'd openly voiced doubt. It's a little late for second thoughts, he replied, his voice steadier than he felt. Emma exhaled slowly and nodded, but the tension in her shoulders didn't ease. The ceremony took place in the grand hall, the massive chandeliers casting a golden glow over the guests. Logan stood at the altar, his gaze scanning the crowd. Victoria was there, of course, front and center with her husband, Richard Monroe, on her arm. Her smile was practiced, sharp enough to cut glass. When Emma appeared at the far end of the aisle, the room fell silent. For a fleeting moment, Logan saw the surprise in Victoria's eyes, her carefully constructed confidence cracking just enough for him to notice. Good. But his satisfaction wavered as Emma walked toward him. She didn't smile. Her steps were measured, deliberate, as if she were walking toward something she couldn't escape. By the time she reached him, Logan felt the weight of her anxiety pressing down on both of them. He took her hand, surprised at how cold her fingers were, and leaned in close. "Breathe," he whispered. Emma's lips barely moved, but he caught her response. "You too." The vows were short, formal. Logan barely heard the words. His attention was fixed on Emma, on the way she blinked too quickly, the way her pulse fluttered visibly at the base of her neck. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Logan leaned in to kiss her, expecting hesitation. Instead, Emma surprised him. Her lips met his with a softness that caught him off guard, and for a moment, the world fell away. But then the applause erupted, and Emma pulled back. Her expression shifted instantly, the vulnerability gone, replaced by something harder to read. The reception unfolded in a blur of speeches and dancing, but Logan barely registered any of it. He couldn't stop watching Emma. She smiled at the right moments, laughed when prompted, and yet there was a distance to her, an invisible barrier that no one else seemed to notice. It wasn't until he stepped outside for air that the evening took a darker turn. A man in a black suit approached him near the fountain, his movements too deliberate to be casual. Logan stiffened, instincts kicking in. "Mr. Hayes," the man said, handing him an envelope. "Congratulations on your wedding." Logan took the envelope but didn't respond. By the time he looked up, the man was gone. He tore it open and pulled out a single photograph. It showed Emma standing outside a rundown motel, speaking to a man Logan didn't recognize. The image was grainy, but the timestamp in the corner was clear, 3 weeks ago. Flipping it over, Logan found a single line scrawled in black ink. "You don't know who you just married." Logan returned to the reception, his pulse pounding. Emma stood near the dance floor, speaking to one of the servers. She must have sensed his gaze because she turned, her smile faltering when she saw his expression. "Everything okay?" she asked as he reached her side. Logan held up the photo. "Care to explain this?" Her face paled, but she quickly recovered. "Where did you get that?" "Answer the question," Logan demanded, his voice low. Emma swallowed, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. "Not here." "Please." Logan leaned in, his words a sharp whisper. "Then you'd better have answers when we're alone." The rest of the night passed in a blur of strained conversations and forced smiles. By the time the last guest left, Logan felt like he was sitting on a ticking bomb. As Emma climbed the stairs to the bedroom, Logan followed close behind, the photograph burning in his pocket. Whatever secrets she was hiding, he was determined to uncover them tonight. The mansion felt larger at night, its corridors stretching into endless shadows. Logan led Emma through the hallways toward their bedroom, his mind racing. The letter she had shown him still burned in his pocket, its ominous words echoing in his head. Emma walked beside him, her movements stiff and mechanical. She hadn't spoken since their brief exchange in the study, and Logan wasn't sure if it was fear or exhaustion keeping her silent. When they reached the bedroom, Logan pushed open the heavy oak door. The room was elegant, dark wood, gold accents, and a 4-poster bed draped in silk. Emma paused at the threshold, her hesitation so palpable that Logan had to resist the urge to reach for her. "You don't have to be afraid of me," he said softly, closing the door behind them. Emma turned, her expression unreadable. "I'm not afraid of you." Her words hung in the air, but Logan wasn't convinced. "Then what are you afraid of?" he asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped toward the window, pressing her fingers against the glass as if searching the darkness for something, or someone. Logan crossed the room and gently touched her shoulder, half expecting her to flinch. She didn't. Instead, she turned to face him, her eyes filled with something he hadn't seen before, resolve. "I need you to trust me," she said quietly. No matter what you find out. Logan's stomach tightened. That's a dangerous request. I know. Her voice cracked, but she held his gaze. But it's the only way we're going to get through this. Later, when Emma stepped into the bathroom to change, Logan allowed himself a moment to gather his thoughts. Everything about her felt off. Her composure, her fear, the way she looked at him like she expected him to turn on her at any moment. He needed answers. His eyes scanned the room, landing on her purse sitting on the vanity table. For a brief moment, he hesitated, but the weight of the letter in his pocket pushed him forward. Logan opened the purse, rifling through its contents: lipstick, a wallet, a phone with no signal. Then he found it. A folded photograph. It was old and faded, but the faces were clear. Emma, much younger and smiling, stood next to a man Logan didn't recognize. Tall, dark-haired, and sharp-eyed, the man had his arm around her shoulders in a way that felt possessive. Protective. And then Logan saw the inscription on the back. Emma and Christopher, always. Christopher. The name Daniel had uncovered during the background check. Logan's pulse quickened. The bathroom door creaked open, and Logan barely had time to slide the photo back into the purse before Emma emerged, dressed in silk pajamas. She froze when she saw him near her things. "What are you doing?" Logan straightened, forcing himself to stay calm. "Looking for answers." Emma's face paled, and for a moment, Logan thought she might collapse. But then she surprised him. "You should have just asked," she said quietly. Emma sank onto the edge of the bed, her hands twisting in her lap. "Christopher Bennett is my brother," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Or, he was." Logan's eyes narrowed. "Was?" "He's dead." The words hit harder than Logan expected. "What happened?" Emma swallowed hard. "It wasn't an accident." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint hum of the wind outside. Logan's instincts screamed at him to keep pushing, to demand the full truth, but something about the way Emma's hands trembled made him hesitate. "You think whoever sent that letter is connected to him?" he asked. Emma nodded. "Christopher got involved with dangerous people. He tried to get out, but it didn't matter. After he died, I ran. Changed my name. Took whatever job I could find to stay off their radar." Her voice cracked, and Logan's gut twisted. "But they found me," she finished. "And now they won't stop." Logan paced the room, his mind working through the pieces. This wasn't just about her. If someone was targeting Emma, then by marrying her, he had made himself a target too. "Why didn't you tell me before?" he demanded, turning to face her. Emma lifted her chin, her eyes flashing with defiance. "Would you have believed me?" Logan hated that she had a point. He sat down beside her, his voice softening. "I don't trust easily, Emma. But if we're going to get through this, you need to tell me everything. No more half-truths." Emma hesitated, then nodded. "I'll tell you everything. Tomorrow." Logan frowned. "Why not now?" "Because," she said, looking toward the window again, "someone's watching." Logan stood and pulled the curtains shut, his muscles coiled with tension. He didn't doubt her anymore, not after the letter, the photograph, and the fear in her voice. Whoever was after her wasn't finished. And now, neither was he. Logan didn't sleep. He sat in the armchair by the window, his sharp eyes fixed on the shadows outside. The weight of Emma's confession lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating. Whoever was after her wasn't just a distant threat, they were close. Too close. Emma lay curled up on the bed, her breathing shallow and restless. Logan knew she wasn't asleep. Neither of them was. By the time the first rays of dawn bled through the curtains, Logan made a decision. He wasn't going to wait for the danger to find them. He was going to meet it head-on. In the morning, Logan called Daniel Cross into his office. "Find everything you can about Christopher Bennett's death," Logan ordered. "Police reports, financial records, anything that connects him to Emma." Daniel hesitated. And if it leads somewhere dangerous? Logan's jaw tightened. Then I want to know exactly who we're up against. As Daniel left, Logan's phone buzzed. An unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Mr. Hayes, a distorted voice greeted him. How does it feel to marry someone else's problem? Logan's blood ran cold. Who is this? A low chuckle came through the line. I'd worry less about who I am and more about what I know. Your wife isn't as innocent as she pretends to be. The line went dead before Logan could respond. Logan found Emma in the library later that day. She sat on the floor, surrounded by books she hadn't touched. He tossed his phone onto the table in front of her. Care to explain this? Emma flinched at the sound, but her eyes quickly hardened. What is it? Someone called me. They knew about you. About Christopher. Emma's face paled, but she didn't look surprised. I told you. No, Emma. Logan's voice sharpened. You told me part of the truth. But what aren't you telling me? Her shoulders sagged, and she looked away. It's not just Christopher's death. Logan's stomach dropped. What else? Emma swallowed hard. He wasn't the only one involved with them. I was too. Logan froze. You what? It wasn't by choice, Emma said quickly, tears welling in her eyes. They used me to get to him. I didn't even realize how deep we were until it was too late. After he died, they threatened me, said I owed them for his debts. And you never thought to warn me? Emma stood, anger flashing in her eyes. I tried. I showed you that letter. That letter didn't say you were involved with criminals. Logan snapped. I didn't have a choice. Emma shouted, her voice breaking. I've been running for years, trying to survive. You don't know what it's like to live in fear every single day. Logan opened his mouth to respond but stopped. The desperation in her voice hit something raw inside him. You should have told me, he said quietly. Emma wiped at her eyes. Would it have made a difference? He didn't answer. That night, Logan reviewed the information Daniel had gathered. Christopher Bennett had been deeply entangled with loan sharks and illegal trades. His sudden death had been ruled an accident, but the coroner's report hinted at foul play, bruises, defensive wounds, and evidence of strangulation. And Emma? She wasn't listed anywhere officially, but Daniel had unearthed photos, grainy images of her at underground clubs, always near Christopher, always looking over her shoulder. Logan felt the walls closing in. She wasn't lying about being scared. But the bigger question was, had she ever truly escaped? In the early hours, Logan found Emma in the bedroom, staring out the window again. They won't stop, she said softly, as if reading his thoughts. Logan walked up behind her, his voice low. Then we won't either. Emma turned, searching his face for any sign of doubt. You mean that? Logan nodded. I said I'd protect you, and I meant it. She exhaled sharply, relief mixing with disbelief. But I need you to trust me completely, Logan added. No more secrets. Emma hesitated before finally nodding. No more secrets. Yet, as Logan pulled her into his arms, he couldn't ignore the voice in his head whispering that her secrets weren't finished. And neither was the danger. Logan sat at the head of his office desk, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows across the room. Daniel had just left, and the new information he provided hung heavy in Logan's mind. The deeper he dug, the clearer it became Emma's past wasn't just complicated. It was dangerous. But there was one person he knew could shed more light on the situation. Victoria. The thought of seeing her again churned his stomach, but she had always been skilled at weaving webs of lies and manipulating those caught within them. If anyone knew the kind of people Emma was running from, it was her. Later that afternoon, Logan stepped into the lavish penthouse where Victoria now lived with her husband, Richard Monroe. Everything about the place screamed opulence, from the marble floors to the velvet curtains, but it felt cold, empty. Victoria greeted him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She wore elegance like armor, her dress tailored to perfection, her hair swept back into a sleek style. "Well, this is unexpected," she said, motioning for him to sit. Logan didn't. "Cut the act, Victoria. I need answers." Her smile sharpened. "Still as charming as ever, I see. What answers?" "Emma." Victoria arched an eyebrow. "Your new bride?" Logan clenched his jaw. "You know something. Don't pretend you don't." Victoria leaned back against the couch, sipping from a crystal glass. "And what makes you think I'd share anything with you?" "Because this isn't about us," Logan said. "This is about her. And I know you've been watching." Victoria's eyes flickered, just for a moment, but it was enough. "You always were observant," she admitted. "Fine. I'll tell you what I know, but don't say I didn't warn you." She set the glass down and leaned forward. "Emma's brother owed money to some very dangerous people Richard used to do business with before we cleaned up our reputation. After Christopher's death, Emma tried to disappear, but no one just walks away from them. They made sure she knew that." Logan's pulse quickened. "Who are they?" Victoria shrugged. "People who don't forgive and definitely don't forget. But here's the thing, Logan, Emma didn't just run. She took something from them." "What?" "Money. Or information. No one knows for sure. But they've been looking for her ever since." Logan's mind raced. Emma had mentioned debts, but she hadn't said anything about theft. If Victoria was telling the truth, Emma's past was even darker than she had admitted. "She used you, Logan." Victoria's voice softened, feigning concern. "And now you're tangled in her mess." Logan stood, his muscles coiled. "You're wrong." "Am I?" Victoria's eyes gleamed. "Be careful, Logan. Love has a way of blinding even the sharpest minds." When Logan returned to the mansion, he found Emma in the sitting room, flipping nervously through a book she clearly wasn't reading. "You lied to me," he said without preamble. Emma's head snapped up, panic flaring in her eyes. "What are you talking about? You stole something, didn't you? From the people who killed your brother." Emma's face drained of color. She opened her mouth to speak but couldn't seem to form words. Logan stepped closer. "Is it true?" Tears welled in her eyes, and she finally nodded. "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't think you'd believe me." Emma's voice broke. "I didn't have a choice. After Christopher died, they wanted me to pay his debts, but I didn't have the money. So I took what I could and ran." Logan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Do you still have it?" "No," Emma said quickly. "I got rid of it months ago." Logan stared at her, searching her eyes for any sign of deceit, but all he saw was raw fear. "Then why are they still after you?" Emma shook her head. "I don't know. Maybe they don't believe me. Or maybe they just don't care." Logan's anger softened, replaced by something else, determination. He stepped closer, cupping her face in his hands. "We'll figure this out," he said firmly. Emma looked up at him, her eyes filled with doubt and hope. "You mean that?" "I do." But as Logan held her gaze, he couldn't shake Victoria's parting words. "Be careful, Logan." Because now, he wasn't just protecting Emma. He was risking everything. Logan couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in. Victoria's warning echoed in his head, but so did Emma's trembling confession. He wanted to believe her, to believe that she wasn't lying about getting rid of the stolen money or information, but the fear in her eyes told him there was more to the story. The next morning, Logan woke to find Emma sitting on the edge of the bed, clutching her phone tightly. "What is it?" he asked, instantly alert. She turned to him, her face pale. "I got another text." Logan took the phone from her trembling hands. "You can't hide forever, Emma. We're closer than you think." Logan's jaw tightened as his free hand balled into a fist. He recognized the pattern: fear tactics, intimidation. Whoever these people were, they wanted Emma to break. "Did you recognize the number?" "No," Emma whispered. "It's blocked." Logan stood, his mind already working through the possibilities. "Get dressed. We're going to the police." "No." Emma's voice was sharp and panicked. "You don't understand. If we involve the police, they'll know where we are. And if they know, they'll come for me. For us." Logan froze. For the first time, the weight of their situation truly sank in. This wasn't just a matter of threats or intimidation. These people weren't afraid of the law. They operated outside of it. By afternoon, Logan had doubled security around the mansion, installing cameras and hiring private guards. But even with those precautions, he couldn't shake the feeling that it wouldn't be enough. Emma spent most of the day locked in her room, and Logan gave her space. But as night fell, he found her on the balcony, staring out at the gardens below. "They won't stop, will they?" she asked softly, not turning to look at him. "No," Logan admitted, stepping closer. "Not until we stop them first." Emma turned to face him, her expression a mix of fear and determination. "How?" "They're shadows, Logan. They don't leave trails." "Everyone leaves a trail," Logan said firmly. "We just have to follow it." Emma's eyes softened, but before she could respond, a loud crash echoed from downstairs. Logan grabbed a gun from the drawer in the study and rushed toward the noise, Emma close behind him. "Stay back," he ordered, but she didn't listen. In the foyer, they found one of the security guards sprawled on the floor, blood seeping from a wound on his temple. Logan's heart pounded as he scanned the room, but whoever had done this was already gone. A single red rose lay on the marble floor, its petals scattered like drops of blood. Emma gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "What does it mean?" Logan demanded. Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "It's a warning." Logan's grip on the gun tightened. "Then we'll warn them back." The police arrived within minutes, but Logan knew it was pointless. Whoever had broken in had already vanished without a trace. "Mr. Hayes," one of the officers said, "we'll increase patrols around the property, but this looks like a targeted threat. Any idea who might want to scare you?" Logan's gaze flickered to Emma. "No one worth mentioning." The officer didn't look convinced, but Logan dismissed them quickly. He wasn't about to let Emma's past turn into public gossip or a weapon the police couldn't control. Later that night, Emma sat curled on the couch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Logan paced the room, his anger barely contained. "This ends now," he said, his voice low but fierce. Emma looked up at him, her eyes glistening with tears. "You don't even know who they are." Logan crouched down in front of her, taking her hands in his. "Then we'll find out. Whatever it takes." She hesitated, then nodded, her fingers tightening around his. Logan stood, determination hardening his features. He wasn't just fighting for answers anymore. He was fighting for her. And he wasn't going to lose. Logan stood at his desk, the dim light of the study casting long shadows on the walls. The red rose from the intruder sat in a glass of water, its petals already wilting. It was a reminder, a message that the danger closing in on them wasn't just a threat anymore. It was real. Emma sat across from him, her hands trembling as she clutched a cup of tea she hadn't touched. "We can't stay here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Logan shook his head. "Running isn't an option." Emma's eyes darted toward the door as if she expected someone to burst in at any moment. "You don't understand, these people don't stop. They'll follow us. Then let them come." Logan's voice was hard, his anger barely contained. "I'm not going to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. And neither are you." She looked at him, desperation flickering in her eyes. "You don't know what they're capable of." Logan leaned in, his voice steady but firm. "No, but I know what I'm capable of. And I'm not letting them take you." That night, Logan's plan began to take shape. He had Daniel trace the burner phone that had sent Emma the threatening messages. The trail led to a rundown warehouse outside the city, exactly the kind of place Logan expected these people to operate from. But he wasn't going in blind. He called in favors, hiring a private team to back him up. Emma begged him not to go, but Logan wouldn't listen. "They won't stop until we stop them," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I have to do this." Emma's voice cracked. "What if you don't come back?" "I will." Logan kissed her forehead, and for the first time since their wedding, Emma didn't flinch. The warehouse was exactly what Logan had expected, dark, damp, and empty except for the faint hum of machinery in the background. His team moved silently, sweeping the area. Logan stayed close, his gun steady in his hand. But something felt wrong. Too quiet. Too easy. Then he saw the light flicker in the far corner. He signaled his men and moved forward, his heart pounding. As they approached, Logan spotted a figure tied to a chair, a woman, her head slumped forward. "Emma?" "No." When Logan stepped closer, the woman looked up, and recognition hit him like a punch to the gut. Victoria. Her lip was split, and her wrists were bound, but her eyes burned with defiance. "Took you long enough," she said, her voice hoarse. "What the hell is this?" Logan demanded. Victoria's laugh was sharp, almost unhinged. "A trap, obviously." The words barely left her mouth before the lights cut out. Gunfire erupted, and Logan dove for cover, his instincts taking over. The room filled with chaos, shouts, footsteps, and the deafening sound of bullets ricocheting off metal. Logan's team fought back, but the attackers had the advantage. Through the chaos, Logan saw Victoria struggling against her bonds. Against his better judgment, he ran to her, cutting her loose. "Don't make me regret this," he growled. Victoria grabbed a gun from one of the fallen men and shot back. "You won't." By the time the gunfire stopped, Logan's team had taken control. Bodies littered the floor, and the few survivors were tied up and ready for interrogation. But it wasn't over. Logan turned to Victoria. "Talk." She wiped blood from her lip. "It was Richard. My husband. He set this up." Logan's blood ran cold. "Why?" "He's the one who funded Christopher's deals," Victoria said. "And when Christopher died, Richard wanted to make sure Emma didn't talk. He thought marrying you would make her feel safe and easier to track." Logan's hands clenched into fists. "Where is he now?" Victoria shook her head. "Gone. But he'll come back. He always does." When Logan returned home, Emma ran to him, tears streaming down her face. "You're okay," she whispered, clutching his shirt. Logan held her tightly. "We're okay." But even as he said the words, he knew the fight wasn't over. Richard Monroe was still out there, and until he was dealt with, neither of them would be truly safe. That night, as Emma finally fell asleep in his arms, Logan stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. He had built his empire brick by brick, surviving betrayal, loss, and pain. But for the first time, it wasn't just about protecting his legacy. It was about protecting her. And he would do whatever it took to keep her safe. Logan sat in the dimly lit study, his fingers drumming against the desk. The faint hum of the security monitors filled the room, but his mind was elsewhere. The confrontation at the warehouse had ended, but the war was far from over. Emma appeared at the doorway, her shadow stretching across the hardwood floor. She hesitated before stepping inside, her eyes scanning the room as if she expected danger to still be lurking in the corners. "You should be resting," Logan said without looking up. "I can't sleep," she admitted softly. "Not after everything." Logan finally looked at her. She wore one of his shirts, the fabric hanging loosely around her frame, making her seem smaller, more fragile than he'd ever allowed himself to notice. But there was a quiet strength in her eyes now, a determination he hadn't seen before. She walked closer and set her hands on the edge of the desk. "I need to know, do you regret it?" Logan frowned. "Regret what?" "This." She gestured around the room. Marrying me. Bringing all of this into your life. Logan stood, closing the distance between them. If I regretted it, Emma, you wouldn't be here right now. Her eyes searched his, looking for doubt. Finding none, her shoulders sagged with relief. But you need to be honest with me, Logan continued, his voice firm but gentle. No more secrets. No more running. If we're going to get through this, we have to trust each other completely. Emma nodded, tears threatening to spill. I do trust you, Logan. Her voice broke, and she looked away. I didn't know how to ask for help. No one ever stayed long enough to help me before. Logan reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers. Well, I'm not going anywhere. The next day, Daniel arrived with an update that left Logan's blood boiling. They froze Richard Monroe's accounts, Daniel explained. But he's already gone underground. No credit cards, no paper trail. He's like a ghost. Logan clenched his jaw. Find him. I don't care how much it costs. Daniel hesitated. Logan, are you sure this is the fight you want? You already took out most of his men. Maybe that's enough. It's not, Logan snapped. He won't stop until Emma's dead, or worse. Emma stepped into the room just in time to hear those words. Her voice trembled, but there was steel beneath it. Then we'll make sure he doesn't get another chance. Logan turned to her, startled by the shift in her demeanor. She wasn't the terrified woman who had stood at the altar just days ago. She was ready to fight. That night, as Logan and Emma sat by the fire, the walls between them began to crumble. Emma opened up about her past, how she had trusted Christopher to protect her and how his death had left her stranded in a world she didn't understand. She told Logan about the nights she'd spent hiding in motels, about the threats she'd received, and about the guilt that had nearly broken her. I hated myself for leaving him, she admitted. For not being able to save him. Logan's voice was soft. You did what you had to do to survive. That's not something to be ashamed of. Emma wiped her eyes. And now? What if we can't stop him? Logan pulled her closer. We will. Together. For the first time, Emma let herself believe it. The evening ended with Emma resting against Logan's chest, her breathing finally steady. Logan knew the danger hadn't passed, but he also knew something had changed. Emma wasn't just surviving anymore. She was fighting. And so was he. But as he stared at the dying embers in the fireplace, Logan couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in his gut. Richard Monroe was still out there. And men like him didn't disappear quietly. The mansion was quieter than usual. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that pressed against Logan's chest and made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. He stood by the window of his study, staring out into the night. The security cameras showed nothing unusual, just the vast, manicured gardens swaying in the breeze. But Logan couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Behind him, Emma sat curled in the armchair, flipping nervously through the pages of a book she wasn't reading. It had been days since the attack at the warehouse, but the tension hadn't left the house, or them. You should try to sleep, Logan said, breaking the silence. Emma closed the book, her fingers trembling. And what about you? When's the last time you slept? Logan didn't answer. He couldn't. Instead, he crossed the room and knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. We're almost through this, he said softly, but the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. Emma shook her head. You don't believe that. I can see it in your eyes. Logan sighed. I just don't want you to be afraid anymore. Before Emma could respond, the faint buzz of Logan's phone interrupted them. He stood and checked the screen. Block number. Emma's face paled. Don't answer it. Logan ignored her and pressed the button. Logan Hayes, a voice rasped. It was low, deliberate. Cold. Logan's hand tightened around the phone. Richard. You're playing a dangerous game, Richard said. And you're running out of time. Logan's jaw clenched. You're the one who's running. A low chuckle came through the speaker. Am I? Because from where I'm sitting, I'm the one calling the shots. Logan's free hand curled into a fist. If you come near Emma again, You'll what? Richard cut him off. You don't have the stomach for this, Logan. But I do. The line went dead. Logan slammed the phone down, the sharp sound echoing through the room. Emma was already on her feet, her eyes wide with fear. He's not done, she said. Logan pulled her into his arms. Neither am I. The following morning, Logan made arrangements to move Emma to a safe house until Richard was found. But Emma refused. I'm not running anymore, she said firmly. Not this time. Logan saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had been missing when they first met. She wasn't the terrified woman he had married. She was stronger now, and Logan realized he couldn't fight this battle without her. Later that evening, as they prepared for the next steps, Logan found an envelope slipped under the front door. No address. No name. Inside, a single photograph. Emma, sitting by the window of the mansion. And scrawled in red ink across the bottom. This isn't over. Logan felt the blood drain from his face. He looked out the window again, scanning the shadows. Someone had been watching. He turned back to Emma, who stood frozen, staring at the photo. We'll end this, Logan said, his voice like steel. But even as he spoke, he knew the battle was only beginning.